My name is Randy Watts, and today's date is March 16th, 2015, and today I'm interviewing Randy Adams from the Union Fire Company of Carlisle. Thanks, Randy, for coming in. Just a couple background questions. Could you give me your age?
Well, I'll be 71 on the 22nd of April.
Okay. And you're retired at this point?
I am retired.
What did you do for a living?
Number of things. I was a filter and oscillator technician for Reeves Hoffman Crystal Plant, Carlisle. I farmed for a while, and I worked as a driver for the Union Fire Company, and I ended up my career in welding for 30 years.
Okay. And when did you join the Union Fire Company?
In the spring of 1962.
Okay. And are you from Carlisle originally,
I
or
am from Carlisle.
how did you get interested in the fire company?
Strictly by accident. I talked to a few friends of mine one night, and they asked me if I'd be interested in joining. And my uncle and grandfather were members of the Union Fire Company, so I decided to join.
So you'd been around the fire company even before you became a member?
Yes, I remember going in there as a little kid, maybe 8, 9 years old, with relatives.
What was the firehouse like then?
Dark and dingy, very solemn. The men that seemed old to me were sitting around playing cards and talking. That's the memory I have of it.
Okay. Do you remember any? Did you get to meet them later, or?
Yes, when I joined, a few of them were still, they weren't active firefighters, but they were in administrative ends of it, and they sat around playing cards, even at that age.
Okay. Okay. How active were you in the fire company?
For a period of time, I was very active. I fought fire, then I went on to be a driver, and then a paid driver, and then slowly evolved out of the fire service for a few years, but now I still go into the firehouse occasionally. I don't feel that I can be of any value to fight fire anymore, but I still like to go in and talk to the guys.
Okay. Did you live at the firehouse?
Yes, I did. I lived upstairs in the bunk room with probably 8 or 9 active members.
Okay. What was that experience like? Do you have any memories of that?
Yeah, I have a lot of memories of that. Some of them we may not talk about, but it was a lot of fun being around the firehouse in those days. I think back on it today, I think the fire service today is more business oriented than it was back then. Not that it wasn't serious, we didn't take it serious, but we also incorporated a lot of fun into what we did.
Mm-hmm.
So they were good times.
Do you still keep in touch with any of the people that lived there in those days? Or?
Oh yeah, I have. Most everybody that lived there I am in touch with, and we have a banquet every year, and I attend that, and it's usually the fellows that were from the firehouse in my era sit together and reminisce.
Did you hold any offices in the fire company?
Yes, I did. The line, I don't know what they refer to it today as, but it would have been chief hose director in my era. And I held trustee and apparatus committee.
And you say you were a paid driver. What did that involve?
Well, that involved being at the firehouse from 6 in the morning till 6 in the evening. There was a year that the fire company needed a full-time driver, and I was available, so I took the position. And it involved maintenance on the fire station, driving the engine to a fire, a few things mechanically to the engine if something needed replaced, or nothing major, just minor things.
Okay. How did you like that experience?
I liked that job. Unfortunately, financially, it wasn't the position I needed to be in, but it was fun to be around the fire station all day, and the people that stopped there, the businessmen in Carlisle, and would stop in and say hello. The police department would stop in and chat, maybe drink a coffee or a Coke. It was interesting.
Okay. And so the firehouse was a pretty active place at that point in
At
time?
that point in time, it was. It was downtown in the middle of Carlisle. Carlisle still had a pretty active business going on, and people just stopped in and talked.
Okay. Was there anything that sticks out as from your firehouse experience that you remember really humorous or funny? Or
No. It would be probably some of the pranks we played on other members in the firehouse. There was too many of them to remember all of them, but I remember one. A member used to come in the bedroom at like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning from being out with his girlfriend or someplace, and he always slammed the one door going into the bathroom. And I remember one night we put a screen door spring on that, and he slammed it shut, and it flew back and hit him in the forehead. And they were the kind of things we did to each other.
okay.
Eggs in the bunker boots was another thing that they'd break when they put them on. But they were things we did.
I imagine there were some characters around the firehouse.
Oh, yes, quite a few.
Any you can describe, or?
Well, the biggest character that I remember was a man named Paul Hodge. He was a black man. Every day he walked down the street to the bank for a local gas station. He did took their money to bank and so forth. And he'd always stop in, and he always had a story. He was the most memorable person that came in the firehouse. And he later became the first black member of the Union Fire Company. And after that, it progressed to there were more, but he was a real good friend.
He was nicknamed the Mayor, I think.
Yeah, we called him the Mayor. He had a nickname, Danny. His correct name was Paul Hodge, but everybody called him Danny. And yeah, he was a very interesting character.
What was the most interesting call that you ever were on? Can you?
The most interesting call I ever went on was not the most dangerous or the most, it was a call I had when I was driving. I had a house trailer on fire. It was snowing and rain, snow and rain mixed. And it was at our farthest end of our territory that we covered. And I was by myself. There was no one on the engine. So I went to this trailer court and I pulled in. I took the shoulder lay off. I laid the hose. I went back, engaged the pumps. And fortunately, one of the other members showed up, so he made the attack on the fire, and I'm standing at the control panel, and this little old lady taps me in the shoulder and she said, "Sir, your fire engine's on fire." And I looked, and sure enough, the smoke was pouring out of the cab of the engine. And I figured it was electrical, so I killed all the battery power to the engine, and I found out later that the windshield wipers malfunctioned and a metal bar dropped down onto a electrical block and shorted out and caused the wiring to burn up. But that was it to me.
Kind of interesting. What was the most dangerous call you were ever on? Do you remember?
Probably the railroad tank car that exploded in Branchville.
And what happened that day?
A train wreck occurred at the crossing at Branchville, and we were called down quite early in the morning, about 6 o'clock in the morning, and we went down, and our fire company wasn't in charge of the fire scene, and they sent us home after we were there about 2 hours. And a little later on in the morning, we were called back down, and when we went back down that time, it was closer to lunchtime. I can't remember exact times, but I'd say at 11 o'clock in the morning, that railroad car with propane exploded, and I remember that.
So you were on the scene when the tank car...
We were inside the concussion area of the tanker. We'd have probably been hurt. Minor burns, like sunburn, is what we got where our bunker clothes didn't cover. That was probably the most dangerous call.
Now, there were several people that were hurt rather seriously that day.
Burnt, yes. They had, fortunately, there was no one there that was really required a lot of hospital care or anything. They were all treated and released, but it did shred bunker coats, and bunker coat being the fire coat you wear. It did knock people to the ground, but that was probably the most dangerous call. It made me respect a railroad car full of propane, I know that.
Okay. Had you had any training, or was there any awareness before that on the part of the fire department? Or was...
Yes, but the years that I was in the fire service, we didn't have the state funded or the state fire schools that they have now. We had in-house training, and we did know what to look for. We knew how to handle ourselves on the fire scene, but some of the other fire companies that we had to work with were not quite as advanced as the Union Fire Company was. The Union Fire Company always seemed to be just on the cutting edge of everything. They always seemed to have a little bit of an edge over everybody else that was in business, serving the community.
What do you attribute that to? What would...
I have a great respect for the Union Fire Company, and that's one reason I always have something like a proud feeling about belonging to the Union Fire Company. Even today, when I hear the name on the radio or in the newspaper, it always seems like it strikes home, as I'm proud to be a member of that organization. But
were there any people that helped it stay on the cutting edge or state of the art? Any particular leaders?
I remember Sam Otten, who was the chief for most of the time I was there. He always seemed to be, he was a Navy veteran, and I think he was in the fire service in the Navy, but he always brought his training from the Navy into our department at the time, and I liked him. He was a lot of fun to be with. And
was there a worst call that you ever responded to, or a worst call that you were ever on?
The worst call I probably ever was on was the Bowman fire. That was just so much fire. That's the most fire I ever saw in a building at one time. I remember that vividly today. And the conditions that night were terrible. It was well below freezing, and everything was froze up.
And that was a particularly long fire, as I recall. You were there for...
Yeah, I think our engine, if my memory serves me correct, pumped 43 hours straight through, with the exception of they changed the oil in the middle of the street that morning up there, but that engine was on the scene a long time.
Is there anything else that you remember about the firehouse that really helped you in life or really?
Well, the firehouse, the friendships I developed over the years, your friendship, I value all the guys that I grew up with in the fire service. And today we still hunt and fish and do things together. They were friendships that were made back in those years that lasted 50 years, some of them longer. But yeah, that was one thing that I.
What changes did you see while you were there? Were there any things that changed in terms of?
A lot of change. I don't think fires were fought any different today than they were back then. However, the materials that buildings are made out of today versus what we had basically wood. Today, the chemicals that come off of fires are much more dangerous than what they were back. Not that you'd wanted to breathe a lot of that smoke in back in those days, but today, your plastics and everything are highly dangerous to your body. And I think the equipment, the breathing apparatus has improved 110% over what we had to work with. But that would probably be the biggest change I could say would be how you prepared yourself to attack the fire. I mean, we just moved in on fires back in those days and got the job done, but today you have to plan a little more before you make the attack.
Okay, are there any other memories you have that you would relate to about the firehouse and your firehouse experience in terms of?
Well, the change, a little bit to get back to the change over the years, and I saw, we did mention Danny Hodge, but I also saw other black members. Before, they frowned on, it was like a men's social club, like so to speak. I saw the black firefighter come on the scene. I also saw the first woman firefighter come on the scene. Now it's quite common to have women firefighters or have black firefighters. I could never figure out why we didn't, but that was the way it was, and a change that came over the fire service, which for the better, as far as I'm concerned. It was a lot of good people come out of that era.
How did the fire company relate, when you mentioned the black community, how did the fire company relate to the black community with calls and when you were on the street? Was there any difference in the?
Fortunately, Carlisle, I always thought, was a nice town to live in because there wasn't as much racial violence and stuff. And I only remember one time being in the fire service that there was a problem, and it was handled quite well. But I never had any problem with them. But anybody that did have a problem with it was probably self-inflicted. So,
Carlisle did have a slight period of social unrest. I think it was in 1969. Were you around for that period of time, or?
yes, I was on it, and I was at the fire station the evenings that the arson fires were being set, and I responded to a few of them. And I remember having rocks thrown at us, but they were so far away that they had no real danger when they did hit you or come close to you. But
Carlisle had a fire alarm system that had an air horn. Do you recall that?
oh yeah, I remember that from when I was a kid growing up. I think You may correct me if I'm wrong. Would that have been around 53 or 54 that went into service in the borough? I remember an old bell on the market house that signaled before the air horn, and if they tore the market house down around 54, if it's in around that area, that's probably when the horn. And
Right.
I remember every day at 11 o'clock in the morning they tested it to see if it worked. But I remember laying in bed at the firehouse, and when we got an alarm there, I remember hearing this blast of air going up the pipe because it went through the bedroom closet. And we used to be able to tell before the first blast of the air horn because we could hear the air shooting up the pipe.
Okay. And that was a loud air horn that you could hear all over the town?
Oh, yes,
Okay.
you could hear that everywhere,
Okay.
even in the outskirts if the wind was going right.
Okay. What was it like at night when you were in the bedroom and that horn suddenly went off? And describe the process, what that was like. And
Well, the first thing that would happen after you were there, the first couple times it went off, it was scary. But after a while, it wasn't. But what would happen would be the alarm would sound, the bells in the fire station would start to ring in the bedroom. The lights would come on, everybody swiveled out of bed into their turnout gear, down the steps they went, and they got on the engine. The driver grabbed the tape coming off the alarm system. When he looked up at the board with the number, what corner the box was on, or whether it was the junior high school or where it was, that's where we'd go.
Is there anything you remember about the responses? What happened on the engine while you were responding to a call?
We always had a hydrant man on the tailboard. His job was to, when the engine arrived on the scene, it was up to the driver to figure out which hydrant he wanted the closest, usually. The man on the tailboard would grab the end of the hose, the engine would start laying hose up the street. The man would make the connection to the hydrant and turn it on. So the next man on the tailboard would have to clamp the hose off and hook it to break it apart and hook it to the engine. That always was an interesting thing that happened. And this was all mapped out usually on the way to the fire by the 2 or 3 guys that were on the tailboard of the engine. The officer, or usually the right-hand seat, the engine was reserved for an officer. So he was planning what he wanted to do at the fire scene and start issuing orders. So, but it was always a well thought out. Usually everything went fine. When you arrived in the fire scene, everybody had their job. Everybody did their job, and consequently, you didn't have a lot of confusion. Once in a while, if you had a new man that hadn't been in the fire service for a while, you might have a little problem, but we ironed that all out.
So a lot of the learning at that point was on-the-job training
On-the-job training.
and coaching. Did you go out and drill ever or train or?
Yeah, we did. We used to take the engines to Lee Torch Spring and pump them. We used to occasionally, later on, the Cumberland County got a fire school, and we used to get down there and train with smoke and ladders and so forth. But most of it was on-the-job training.
Okay. A lot of storytelling around the firehouse?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and after you were there a while, you heard the same stories over and over again, and it was always interesting to see how much it changed from one story to another. But yeah, and that.
Everybody always told the truth, right?
Oh yes.
So, okay. Were you ever at a fire where somebody got hurt or injured, or?
Yeah, I was. I was on the fire scene. I can't remember the street. I think it was Elm Street in Carlisle one night. It wasn't a major fire, but it was one of the members from the Cumberland got smoke inhalation while he was in the building. And I remember giving him CPR back in those days till the ambulance could take him to the hospital where he was treated for. But I remember that.
And he was okay?
Yeah,
Were you around when the Union had the accident where Vince Mahoney died?
yes, I was responding to the call, not on the engine, but I was living in Carlisle then, and when the call came in, I was on my way. Of course, I stopped at the scene of the accident. I didn't go to the fire, but yeah, that was a sad time.
How did that affect the fire company?
It was very solemn for a good while. Vince's dad was active in the fire company, so you had constant memory. He was around. He was still active in the fire police, and it was hard for a while.
I believe Vince was president of the fire company at the time of the accident.
I think maybe he was. I remember Vince, my memory of Vince Sr. was always fire police. He was always active in that, kept that going.
Did you know Vince Mahoney Jr.?
Yes, yes, I
around?
knew Vince.
He was a younger
He
college.
was younger than I was, but I remember him. He was a very good firefighter, very dedicated.
Did that change how the fire company approached things or thought about calls, or was there?
I would say for a while, it made people a little more alert of what could happen. But then in anything, after a while, that wears off and you tend to get reckless again. Not reckless, you tend not to think about those things. I think in Carlisle we're pretty lucky because I think most of the drivers in Carlisle are very careful. I know sometimes they catch the blame for not being, but they really are.
Did you have children that could have become active in the fire company, or?
I had 3 boys, and none of them ever joined a fire company.
Did you ever have them around the firehouse, or?
Oh yeah, a couple times we had an antique 27 American of France, and at that point in time, Frank Line owned the engine. The fire company didn't own it at that time, and Frank would let me drive it to parades. I took it on one fire call one night when we were getting ready for a parade. But anyway, I remember one Memorial Day parade in Boiling Springs. My oldest boy rode with me on the fire engine in that parade. And I think my brother-in-law's boy, there was a couple guys from the firehouse, and we had our kids on the engine in the parade.
They just never developed an interest in.
They never did. I guess they were sick of hearing me talk about it.
It doesn't. Did you notice, even in your time, a decline in the interest in the volunteer fire company with less members, or?
The decline in the fire service was toward the end of my tenure in the fire service. I think the biggest deterrent there was the fact that now the state is starting to say, for you to ride that engine, you have to have X number of hours of training. And when you stop and think about the volunteer fire service, training is necessary. But when you're asking people to give up as many hours as they have to for the fire service, now you're telling them they have to go take training, usually at their own expense. I think that was the biggest decline in the fire service.
And how long did you stay active in the fire company, roughly? Do you have,
Into the 80s,
okay,
probably 84, 85.
okay, so about 25 years
Yeah.
all total. And that was probably one of the, in terms of the firehouse, one of the bigger changes was the training requirement.
The training requirements, yes. I would say, and I still say today, that's why fire companies have trouble recruiting members.
When you joined, how did you have to do fundraising? How was the fire company funded?
Yeah, we sold horse show. We had a horse show every year. We had to take the engine out through the countryside with a handful of tickets and sell tickets to the people whose area we served. And we had, later years, we had a Bavarian festival. It was hard to raise money for the volunteer fire company. But they were two of the fundraisers that I can remember being involved in.
As we wrap up, anything else you remember, any people, any experiences that you think would really help explain the volunteer fire experience or the Union Fire Company?
Well, from the Union Fire Company, I can only speak. I belonged to some other fire companies, but you might as well say socially, not actively. And I can remember the Union Fire Company was more like a family. Merle and Shirley Nace, Merle being the nighttime driver, his home was always open. We'd come in there and have coffee or get in the refrigerator and get something to eat. Or it was just like being at home. And they always treated us as their kids. Christmas time, we always got presents. We always, birthdays were recognized. And I think that was the thing. The fire company to me was more like a family. And the fellows that were around here today are still like brothers to me. And
Great. Okay, well, I think we'll wrap up. I thank you for your time and
Hey.
appreciate it very much.
I thank you.